All right. So we are fortunate enough today to speak with Randy Bird, who is the Director of Sports Nutrition at the University of Virginia. Randy, thanks for joining us. Obviously, you and I met at the University of Kansas, which was
a long time ago.
Yeah, we both look the same, so that's encouraging.
Yes.
But I think you've been at Virginia. I think you got there. Our paths crossed in '08, so you got to Virginia in 2010, I think. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
Okay, and you were in a similar role when you and I met at Kansas, obviously working with the athletes that I, coached with women's volleyball, and obviously I think you did all the sports teams at Kansas when I was there. So the other piece that I think is important to acknowledge, and this goes back to when you and I were at Kansas, you would run a noon workout for all of us, which I thought was always fun, something I looked forward to. And that was because you had a background, obviously, in strength and conditioning. And, I always think it's very helpful when, you have some other knowledge that you're coming at this with and trying to relate to the athletes. So I think that's important to note, obviously. So, first question to kick this thing off, just why is nutrition so important for athletes to invest time and energy in? We spend a lot of time, obviously, strength and conditioning and skill development, but, it appears that nutrition is, it's just a bar or it's just a means to an end. And, I think everybody probably likes food, but, why is it so important for athletes?
So that question I could probably talk for 5 hours on. But in short, the food we eat is what makes the body work. And whether that's working optimally or subpar, the type of food you put in your body is going to ultimately determine the results you see from your practice or your training. Because when we think about the workouts you do, think about the stress that you're putting on your body, you're intentionally damaging your body to try to build it up stronger, faster, more explosive than it was before. You're wanting to see your body change. And if you're not putting the right building blocks into your body to give your body a chance to build it back to a stronger condition, you're just going to be spinning your wheels with your training. So that's one piece, but then also the food we eat provide they're called micronutrients that allow your rest of your body to function normally, not just for performance, but immune system, brain function. So if you're wanting to perform well in school, if you're wanting to stay healthy and not miss time from training, what we're eating greatly impacts how that works.
Awesome. Yeah, I had a feeling when I kicked it off with that question that you probably could have spent the whole session talking about that.
Oh, absolutely. That you could go down many rabbit trails with that.
Yeah. Good. Well, that's helpful. And I've always thought of it as gasoline, that if I put in the cheapest stuff, and I go through a drive-through on my way home from a workout and get fast food, I'm putting in the worst possible gasoline in my engine. And over time, I may not realize it initially, but over time, obviously, I'm probably not, as you mentioned, replenishing and giving my body the right stuff to develop as best as it can. So,
yeah, when you look at energy, gasoline is a great analogy that I use a lot, is comparing the car I drive around to get to and from work to a high performance sports car or a NASCAR. Their vehicles can run on the same gas that I use. They're just not going to win. They're not going to perform their best. So that fuel piece is a great analogy. And the food we eat does that, but it does so much more. Quality in, quality out. We definitely want to be paying attention to what we're putting in our body.
Awesome. I know just from our experience that you've worked with individual players, and obviously, when I was at Kansas, you talked to the whole team. Help me understand just what you're doing with either the individual player or the teams, what types of things are you addressing with them, and why?
Sure. From an individual basis, obviously everybody's different. Everybody's background's different. What they're used to eating is different. Their likes, dislikes, food intolerances, even allergies. So we have to come up with the best strategy for that individual to fuel their body appropriately and be able to have the energy they need for the workouts and to recover from the workouts. So that looks different for every single athlete. Um, Obviously, there are some general guidelines that work for most people, but for the individual, we want to go deeper to make sure it's something, a plan that they can stick to, that they enjoy eating that, because food is enjoyable, so it should be enjoyable. So I don't want to have a plan for somebody where it's a bunch of food that they don't enjoy and prefer not to eat, because then they might stick to it for a week or two and then say, screw it, I'm going to go back to the way I was. Um, so we start with, okay, where is the athlete now? So what small things can we change? What's the low hanging fruit that we can start with to make some positive change? And then we just build from there. I never ever want to just completely overhaul somebody's diet from the get go. That's a recipe for failure. So it's making incremental changes, just like with training. You don't go from the bar to putting two 45-pound plates on both sides of the bar in one day. You have to progressively build to that. So we need to develop habits. So a big piece with nutrition is lifestyle change and building on those habits so it becomes second nature. So a lot of it is that first evaluation of, okay, what am I doing currently? What areas do I need to change? And then set weekly or every 2 week goals to make that change possible.
And this is a question I had for later, but I guess you're kind of bleeding into it right now. So give me some ideas of what that looks like. So do you have an athlete food journal for a couple of days so you can get a sense and evaluate what they're doing? And I think you hit on a couple of things. You know, I have a player right now that one of her goals is to try a new food every week because she knows she's a very picky eater. Um, and I know you mentioned, you know, food's supposed to taste good. And, you know, my brother has, he's a naturopathic doctor, and he had said, hey, nobody ever said it's supposed to taste good. It's supposed to just be fuel. So stop trying to, you know, make it taste good. So, but what types of things, just to give my athletes some idea, you know, if you were to work with somebody individually, you know, what are some of those steps to do some evaluation?
Yeah. So first and foremost, when I meet with somebody, I have them write down, or I walk them through a day, and either they write it down before they come in, or through my questionings of them, we go through what a typical day looks like. Uh, and then we set goals from there. So it could be that their typical breakfast is a bowl of Frosted Flakes. Not the best breakfast. So that might be our first goal of, okay, what is that athlete willing to eat at breakfast that's going to be a better change? And then that could be our sole focus for an entire week is, okay, we're going to have oatmeal with a glass of milk for breakfast instead of that Frosted Flakes. So something to that effect. But what I have them do is keep record. So it could be 3 days, it could be the entire week. Because if you're not doing self-monitoring, then you're probably going to fall away from what you're trying to do. And what I mean by self-monitoring, there's multiple ways that we monitor what we do. So that could be keeping a food record, other areas of life. It could be your fitness tracker. So everybody's got high-tech watches now that keep track of steps and everything else that you're seeing, oh, I'm 100 steps away from my goal, then I'm going to go do it. So if you're not monitoring your nutrition, then you're not you're taking a risk of coming up short and not meeting your goals. So one piece is that self-monitoring. Now, I don't want to go overboard with that and feel like you have to log every single item that you eat every day, every second, because that could become an obsession, and then you lose sight of the goal of and why you're doing it, and more obsessed with the tracking of it and doing it perfectly. And there is no perfect. One thing I always tell athletes up front is I never want somebody to follow my nutrition plan for them 100% of the time and feel like they have to. You need to leave room for some deviation from that plan for life. So I generally like to say a 90-10 rule of 90% of the time you're following a nutrition plan for performance. 10% of the time you deviate from that. It could be having fun. And I always stress the point that it could be going to Ben and Jerry's and having ice cream one time. So that's one of your deviations. But the reverse is true also. It could be anything not doing what you're supposed to be doing. So if it's that breakfast was our goal and you decided to sleep in and skip breakfast, that's a deviation also. So both ends of the spectrum work. So we monitor the goal for a week, and if we weren't able to achieve the goal every day that week, then we need to keep that goal and or reassess it to see what was the barrier that prevented from achieving that goal and how do we fix it, because we don't want to just move from one goal to the next without developing habits of that first goal.
Awesome. That's super helpful. Super helpful. So when we worked together, a couple things that I really liked that you did was you had a cooking night with our athletes.
Mm-hmm.
And then another thing that I remember that you did was you went out to a store with them and tried to help them. I'm not sure, just shopping, like, hey, maybe look at the back of a label, and the first thing says sugar, probably not the best option. So I would imagine, with technology, maybe there's some things that, maybe you don't do that anymore. But is there some ideas that you can give my athletes? And I'm not sure even if you have those examples on a YouTube video that maybe you could share that I can, show them what I'm talking about. But have you evolved that at all, or are you still doing those things, or can you fill me in a little bit?
Yeah. So scheduling at UVA is different than what I had at Kansas. So the cooking classes and cooking demos are a little harder to do, to where timing wise, I seem to only be able to do that during the summer and not during the school year. So as athletes are still around during the summertime and they're taking summer classes, obviously there's a lot more free time. So we're able to do more cooking classes in the summertime. And of course, I would be doing it during this period if we weren't having to work from home. And if the athletes were still around, this is the time I'd be doing it. So what we're trying to work around that way is develop some virtual cooking classes. So getting on Zoom and having same type of education, but relying on the athlete to be in their own kitchen and cook. So that could be a little bit better because it's showing them what to do at their place versus coming into my office and using the equipment that I have. So that's one way. As far as the grocery store stuff, we still do that. And it's really taking an athlete through the grocery store, showing them how the majority of what you need is around the outside of the store. Because if you look at the layout of the store, you have the produce, you have the meat, you have the dairy, all the quote unquote real food is on the outside, with some exceptions. There are some stuff in the aisles that are great for you too. But when you look at the aisles, for the most part, those are your highly processed, shelf-stable stuff. So you want to get the majority of your stuff from the outside, but then when you're going through the center of the store, you're more looking at the frozen foods. So it could be frozen fruit for smoothies. It could be frozen vegetables. You look at things like oatmeal and pasta and rice that are in the center. So those type of whole foods, the fewer the ingredients, the better. And it's to what I loved about doing that was seeing what the athletes normally would buy and would like to buy, and then how can we modify that to get better food than what they were currently buying. And the other thing I would do with the combination of those two is with the recipes, show them how much it costs to make a meal or make 4 meals with the recipe, and compare that to going to a fast food place and show them how much money they actually save by cooking for themselves versus relying on fast food or restaurants all the time.
Yeah, can you define just what the difference is for processed versus non-processed, just so we understand what you're talking about?
Sure. The term processing can mean many things. I mean, something as simple as me cutting an apple now turns it into a quote unquote processed food. But what I mean by processed food is when you have whole grains that are now stripped down to the smallest component, you've removed the fiber, you've removed a lot of the vitamins and minerals, and you're just getting that simple carbohydrate. And then we're adding preservatives to it to allow it to stay on that shelf for a long period of time before it goes bad. That's what I'm looking at as processed food. Examples, I would say if you look at something like a hamburger helper or tuna helper kit, that is a lot different than you buying a whole grain pasta and tomato sauce. That's 2 whole food ingredients versus a box of something that has 20 ingredients on it.
Killing me. That was one of my go-tos in college, man. All of my roommates and I would fire up 2 of those boxes and we'd eat like kings.
So with it, I'm not saying to never have that, because sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes, I mean, that could be a step in the right direction for somebody, because they could be doing something even worse. And that could be the intermediate step to make an improvement. Because with those, at least for the most part, you're adding whole food protein sources to it. So you do get some benefit from it, but just not as much as if you had made everything else yourself.
Yeah, it's funny, just even this area in athletics of nutrition, when you and I were in college and, when I competed as an athlete, it wasn't even there. And,
No.
I think back and reflect as you're talking on, ramen noodle packets every day and just what my what it looked like for me, and just going, gosh, just if there was some education back then of, it's fun how this field just continues to evolve. People are starting to understand, how important it is. And, the other piece that, you mentioned when we started that I think is really important, especially for my athletes here who are very academically focused, just like at UVA, what you put in, helps you be sharper mentally. And I think that's a really big piece that, gets missed out on this. And, they all obviously go to class every day. And, we've got several people in engineering and different majors that, they're being tested. And, I tried to speak to them a little bit about sleep. I know you're a big believer in it, and that's how we recover. And, I've always believed you hit a point of diminishing returns, that you think you're going to be up studying and really you're just there, you're present, you're not really getting anything out of it. So
research has shown with sleep, just from a mental function standpoint, that staying up all night studying, you actually perform worse than if you actually just slept. Because then if you got your sleep, then your brain's going to work appropriately and access what you have learned that cramming and staying up all night makes it harder on you. Sleep does so much for our body from a recovery standpoint, from a nutrition standpoint. Sleep alters hormones, alters cravings. So if we have too little sleep, um, research is showing that we crave more sugar, more fat. We eat more when we're sleep deprived. Part of that is trying to stimulate the brain and get it to work. But on average, research is showing that we eat about 500 extra calories on days that we got too little sleep. We're not burning 500 extra, but we are eating more. So sleep is huge from a metabolism standpoint. And that could be the missing link if somebody says they're eating right, they're training right, and not seeing the results they want, that it could be poor sleep or lack thereof that's keeping them from reaching their goals.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. You kind of hit on this a little bit, but what's your definition of eating healthy for a college athlete? What does that look like?
So generally when I talk about eating healthy, I split food into 4 categories. I have your carbohydrate, which is your energy source. It does a lot more than that, but that's your fuel. So carbohydrates, we want more quote unquote foods in their natural state and less processed. So carbohydrates, you're looking at sweet potatoes, brown rice, wild rice, pasta, starchy vegetables like corn and peas, whole grain like oats, versus your kind of simple sugar type carbohydrates. Now, that being said, simple sugar around exercise can be beneficial. That's why sports drinks have sugar, to get it into the blood quickly for that workout. Your muscles will use it during that time, but we don't need it the rest of the day. They're called sports drinks because they're for sports, not for lunch, not for dinner. And that's a mistake that I see athletes make, is drinking a sports drink at every meal when they don't need it. But so we start with carbohydrates. You have more fiber, whole grain. You get more fiber and protein from natural carbohydrates versus the processed ones. Then the second category is protein. And the biggest emerging thing in research with athletes and protein is not so much the total amount for the day, but how we split it up. We need quality protein, so that means it has all the amino acids your body needs. So the best sources, the way I explain it to more elementary, middle school kids, is the best protein sources fit into 2 categories: was an animal or came from an animal. So was an animal, you got fish, chicken, turkey, beef, pork. Came from an animal, eggs, any dairy product, milk, yogurt, cheese. Those are the highest quality proteins, meaning they have all the amino acids your body needs and they're digested and absorbed easier. Doesn't mean you can't get it from plants. Just with plants, they're harder to digest, and you have to eat more protein from plants to get the same effect as you do for animals. So for instance, rice protein is a common, pea and rice protein are commonly used in sports nutrition products that are plant-based. To get the same effect of 20 grams of whey protein, you need 30 grams of the pea and rice protein. So you can still get it. You just need to do more of it. But we want to have quality protein, and then we look for lean protein at that. So the other simple rule is you count the legs. The fewer the legs, the better. So fish, obviously no legs. Then chicken and turkey, you got 2, and then you get to the beef and pork. So we're wanting to have fish more often than beef and pork, and chicken and turkey are fine. The leaner the product, the better. Now, I had, using that example with elementary, middle school kids, I did have one kid throw a wrench into that and ask me about shrimp and crab. And I treat them the same as fish, even though they got a lot of legs. That still works. And then for protein, the distribution is important, that we're having quality protein 4 times a day, maybe 5. So every few hours, you get that quality protein source. Um, what research is showing is if we do that, then you're providing what you need to repair your muscles multiple times throughout the day versus the typical American pattern of not much protein at breakfast, a little more at lunch, and then a lot at dinner. And in that type of pattern, we really stimulate your muscles once during the day versus 3 times if you evenly spread it out. So the second part was protein and spacing it out. And the last 2 are your fruits and vegetables, and then your healthy fats. So the fruit and vegetables, the way I explain that is that helps you handle stress. The more stress you put on your body, the more fruits and vegetables you need to have, because they have all the micronutrients that your body uses to help you handle stress. So that's your vitamins and minerals and other, they're called phytonutrients, that allow your body to function optimally. Again, whether that's physical stress, like the stress you put on your athletes, and that could be mental stress too. uh,
No way.
but, then, but then also the social stress that you might have with friends, schoolwork, whatever stress you're putting on your body, the more fruits and vegetables you need. Then the last category is that healthy fat. This helps you deal with inflammation. It helps you regulate hormones as well. But the more stress you're putting on your body, the more inflamed it can get, which then makes it longer for you to recover. So healthy fat has anti-inflammatory properties, and that's coming from nuts like almonds, walnuts, pecans, pistachios, but also seeds like sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds. Avocado is a great source of healthy fat. And then your healthier oils are your olive oil and avocado oil. So we're wanting to have those type of fats more than your more solid saturated fats, which would be like that visible white fat you see on meat. The more of that healthy fat we have, the less of the saturated fat, the less inflammation you would have. And what would also fit into that is the fat you get from fish. So your omega-3s, your fatty acids that you get from fish, are very anti-inflammatory. So we want to have that variety. And then there's variety within each category. Variety is absolutely essential for that to work and you get everything that you need.
So is there any type of, in every, you mentioned the Fitbits and, technology goes, every day it's changing and getting better. And even in your industry, um, is there anything that you'd recommend, like an app or anything that, would be free, or something that athletes, or even that you have your athletes do that, you've seen is really helpful, or ways that they can, again, not make this huge change, but at least be aware, kind of what they're doing, or what they're missing?
Sure. There's a newer app. A colleague was developing Eat to Win. That's helpful. You got your standard MyFitnessPal and Lose It. The problem with those, I don't think they do a great job to take into account the type of training that athletes do and the intensity. So the issue with those is they tend to underestimate what athletes need. I shouldn't say people, because the general public that's fairly sedentary, those could be okay. But for the type of training that athletes do, Lose It and MyFitnessPal tend to set you up for under fueling. But the Eat to Win it's not perfect. There is no perfect app out there, tracker for athletes, but that's a good place to start.
Awesome. So, being in a place that's budget sensitive, You know, we don't have a training table like you might have. We don't have a chef or a cook that, you know, you would consult with. Um, we're not probably eating at high-end, you know, restaurants on the road. Um, you know, what's your best recommendation, you know, in a position like this, you know, where we can have some flexibility, but, you know, would I be better served, you know, stopping at a Whole Foods and giving kids, you know, $7, for example, than, you know, taking them somewhere or, you know, meal prep you mentioned, which, you know, I want to ask about at the end here, but, you know, and just timing, you know, pre-game, post-game, post-workout. You know, can you elaborate a little bit or what your feelings or thoughts are on
Sure. First thought was $7 isn't going to go far to Whole Foods.
that?
um, but yeah, stopping at a place, hardly ever would recommend Whole Foods just because of the pricing. In that type of situation, that you can get great food there, and they have the hot bar to go through. There are other grocery stores that would have that similar hot bar setup that you can get very good food options at a cheaper price. So yeah, that's a great strategy. Now at the same time, those hot bars have your fried chicken tenders and uh, some other not so great pregame type of options, or even recovery for post. But for pregame, general strategy is you're wanting to eat a meal uh, 3 to 4 hours out, and that gives your body a chance to digest that food, because essentially it takes, if you have a mixed meal, meaning it has protein, it has fat, it's going to take 3 hours ish to get out of your stomach and get into your intestines, where then it can start making its way into the bloodstream. If you eat a full meal too close to the match, sorry, then it's still going to be in the stomach and disrupt your energy levels. It could make you sick to your stomach, but it could also mean that more blood flow is trying to go to your digestive system versus your muscles. Timing of the pregame meal is important. Uh, you can still eat closer to your match, but the closer you get to your match, the more you have to remove protein and fat, because they take longer to leave your stomach. Carbohydrates can leave your stomach faster. Uh, and as we get closer to the match, then we want to focus more on carbohydrates than we do protein and fat for that reason. Um, as far as stopping and getting food, when you finish training, when you finish a competition, um, you have more freedom at that point. And what I mean by that is you've used energy. There's a lot of blood flow going to the muscles. Your muscles are much more sensitive to soak nutrients in. So if you have less quality at that time, you can get away with it more. And I intentionally say get away with it because it's still not optimal, but you will be able to get more out of it at that post training, post practice, post competition time point than any other time in the day, um, because of just our hormonal environment and blood flow to the muscles and how our muscles respond to nutrients during that time frame. Uh, the rest of the day is where we really need to nail it down on quality and timing. Um, so if we had just one time that you got a little less quality, it's immediately after.
Awesome. You know, I've always been a big believer in, you know, trying to stay away from fried food and obviously drinking pop and doing some of these things. And different places I've worked, you know, it's been handled differently. Um, and can you just maybe give a quick example of you know, pregame meal on a budget might look like, and B, why eating something fried or having, soda is not a very good option prior.
Sure. I'll start with that part first. So the fried food, um, generally when you talk about frying, you're going to have breading on it. So that breading is your as simple carbohydrate as you can get. And then you're throwing it in oil. And it's not that avocado and olive oil that I talked about that are anti-inflammatory. You're typically looking at a blend of vegetable oil, highly processed oils that, and what I mean by highly processed, to extract the oil from their seeds, you're having to really heat it and press it, and it changes the structure, chemical structure of it. Those foods are more inflammatory. But then when we're soaking that bread in it, uh, when you get it, then you're getting a significantly higher fat load for that meal, which is going to take longer to digest. So, as a fuel source for a competition, that's in my opinion, a terrible option um, because of the inflammatory processes and how long it takes to digest. So, a better option, if you're looking at chicken tenders, a better option is always going to be a grilled or baked chicken breast. And it can be in tenders, they can be in strips, but it needs to be grilled or baked because then you're removing a lot of that processing that we talked about at the very beginning of this talk. So in general, pregame meals, you're looking at very lean protein source because then you have less fat, less time it takes to digest that. You look at uh, a mixture of carbohydrates. So it doesn't all have to be whole grain at that time, but you want some whole grain and you want, when I say some not whole grain, it could be like a dinner roll. But your entire carbohydrate source should not come from that. We want to have more like your potatoes at that time, sweet potatoes. It doesn't matter if it's white potatoes, sweet potato, they digest the same. The difference between them are some of the vitamins and minerals. Like sweet potatoes have a lot more vitamin A. White baking potatoes have more vitamin C and more potassium. But the rest is very similar. So having a potato, and then the one part of the pregame meal that seems a little counterintuitive is you don't want to overload with vegetables. Vegetables are great for you, but they are much higher in fiber. And if you overdo that, then you could have more digestion related issues when it comes time for competition. So if you think about eating broccoli, which is fine to have a pregame meal, but not overdoing it, broccoli, cauliflower, they take a lot longer to get through your intestinal tract, and they can lead to more gas and bloating, which will alter your comfort level as you're trying to compete and could take away from your mental focus as well because of you're thinking more about how your gut feels than what you need to be doing out on the court. So generally we're looking at lean protein, carbohydrates, some vegetables, not a lot, fruit, and then your hydration. And that hydration should be water, should be milk. Milk has been shown to rehydrate and have you hang on to water in your body more effectively than water by itself because of the electrolytes in it and the just combination of carbohydrates and protein in the milk. But we want to have that type of variety at a pregame meal. Soft drinks, quick, simple sugars, too far out from your competition, not great. Then you have surges in insulin, and you can actually see your energy level spike and drop off too quickly with something like that. Uh, the rest of the issues with soft drinks tend to be more the other chemicals that are added, like phosphoric acid, and those have more long-term. You have to have a lot of it long-term to be problematic, but you don't need to develop that habit. I had a interesting virtual conference that I listened to around plastics, and most soft drinks that you see are coming in plastic bottles, or even aluminum cans are lined with plastic on the inside, that people aren't really aware that the aluminum cans aren't just all metal. They have a plastic lining, and those chemicals actually leach into what you're drinking and then get into our body. And it alters our hormonal profile in our body, which is terrible for everybody, but terrible for athletes as well. So the more of the plastics we can stay away from, the better.
And it's funny you bring that up, because one of the videos I've typically always shown a team was, this is from years ago, where, they pour a can of Coke in a pot and they boil it. And, after a couple of minutes of it heating up, what's left. And, I've always said, hey, this is, your body's a machine, and it's a chemical machine. And, this is what it gets down to, and it's trying to digest. And as you can tell by, looking at all this refined sugar and everything else, it doesn't look good. And I guess let's just stay on that for one more second. So, because I've had an athlete, in the past, who was very conscious, wanted to make some changes, and they were doing a very good job, and were very diligent about calories. And, I've always tried to explain that it's not as simple as people may lead you believe that it's calories in versus calories out. Well, it's not that easy.
There's so many things on that note. There's so many things that affect the calories out piece. So it's not as simple as, okay, I just ran a mile, so I've burnt this amount. There's so many other variables in our body that affect our amount of calories we're burning, like you and me just sitting here talking. So it's not the simple arithmetic. It's a lot more calculus.
And to that point, when I had observed just some of the calories in, I tried to help educate, like the 140 calories, for example, maybe from the can of Coke, your body does a completely different digestion and absorption of 140 calories of broccoli, for example.
Yes.
And can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. So the example I would go with there is comparing fruit to fruit juice. So like, for instance, eating an apple, you get the entire package. You get the skin of the apple, you get the fiber with it. The flesh has soluble fiber that has its own benefits. You get a lot of phytonutrients, or things called polyphenols, that are great for your, a lot of things, cardiovascular function and even mental stimulation. But then compare that to juice. They've extracted some of the flavor, obviously, but they've extracted the sugar and the liquid. And if you drink 12-ounce glass of juice, of apple juice, you're getting the same calories as eating 3 apples. You could easily drink 12 ounces of juice and be done in a few seconds. And then that sugar is going to go into your stomach, into your intestines, and then be into your bloodstream very quickly. It takes you much longer to eat 3 apples. You're going to find yourself full sooner, but then you're getting all the other nutrients with it, and but it'll take much longer for that blood sugar response to occur, because of just having to break apart the structure of the apple compared to that simple sugar found in the juice. And I see people grabbing 16, 20-ounce bottles of juice, and they finish it off in 2 or 3 minutes. And I'm like, you're never going to sit down and eat 4 or 5 apples. Why are we going to drink 4 or 5 apples? Now, exceptions would be people that, like Michael Phelps, training for the Olympics, and he's training multiple hours a day for multiple events, and he's burning 8,000 calories a day. Then there's no way you're going to get 8,000 calories from just whole foods. The digestionally, you couldn't. So there are extreme examples, but I've seen too many people look at an athlete like Michael Phelps and what he did to fuel 8,000 calories and justify what they're doing to eat 3,000 calories. And it's a completely different scenario.
Yeah, super helpful. Got a couple more here to rifle through. I want to be mindful of your time. Portion control, and what type of food and when or how often should we be eating it? You alluded to a little bit of this already, but is there anything that maybe you can just, I probably used this in the past. Hey, a fist should represent this much, and your plate should look a little diverse. But is there some tips that you could give on that?
Yeah. So when you talk about the plate, it depends on your activity level of that day. So on a off day, your plate should look different than a fairly light work day to a very intense work day. And what changes, honestly, is the percentage of your plate that's coming from carbohydrates. So your protein intake should be stable. You're going to have the same amount of muscle to support every day. So protein intake should be about the same every day. Fat's going to be similar, but if you do a lot more work and you need extra calories, then that fat quantity can bump up. It's the carbohydrates. As we talked about earlier, that gasoline, that's your gas. And if you're going, to use the car analogy, if you're just driving home to work and back, you don't need as much gas as if you're driving to another state. So if you're doing more with your vehicle, then you need more gasoline. So that's where that's going to change. And I love the use of your hand as portion sizes. So your palm, just take the fingers away. So just the palm and the thickness. For females, one palm size piece of meat is pretty close to a 3-ounce piece of meat. So then that's going to be roughly 20 grams of protein, 25 grams of protein. So that is a great serving at a meal. Your fist is about the size of a cup. So when we look at a cup of starch, so a cup of rice, a cup of pasta on your plate, that fist would be 1 cup. So that would be 1 serving. Now, what you did for the day would determine how much of that you would actually need. But those are 2 examples. And then your thumb is a serving of fat. So that tablespoon of olive oil or a serving of peanut butter, the size of your thumb, would be a good example of what that fat serving should look like.
Man, I'm way over on my fat. I'm not having that. I'm having way more peanut butter than that, Jay.
Well, you can have, it depends on how much you need for the whole day. So maybe you get 2 servings at once and not at the next meal. So that's a good thing with fat, is you can move that around.
Good. This was a really, I think interesting question from one of my athletes. They were asking about trying to stay hydrated, which I think was great. But they were a little confused on, water versus some type of electrolyte replacement or solution or something, or adding it to their water. So where does your head go with, trying to recommend stuff like that? And, unfortunately, I've always been a believer, the Gatorades and Powerade just have so much sugar, and even just trying to water it down and do different things. But, where does your head go with them trying to get that stuff, and how would they best do it?
Sure. To reiterate a point I made earlier, is those sports drinks, yeah, they have sugar for a purpose. It's timing of when you're actually getting it that matters. So it's a sports drink, not a dinner drink. And and I love they don't make them anymore, but the Gatorade commercials with Peyton Manning and Cam Newton and JJ Watt of basically you got to sweat it to get it. So you have too many people going into a convenience store and just picking up a Gatorade. They haven't done anything. They don't need it. But from a hydration standpoint, water is first and foremost the main thing that you need to be drinking. Everybody's sweat rate's different. So we have to determine what that is to determine quantities. If you know you're a heavy sweater, then you know you're going to need to drink more to replace what you sweat out. And with that sweat rate, everybody sweats out different concentrations of salt too. So we can't just replace water. If we don't replace the salt, also, then the levels of sodium in your blood start to drop, and that can be dangerous. What that's called is hyponatremia. Another name is water toxicity. In extreme cases, people have actually died from that. And usually it's two scenarios of beginner marathon runners that are scared of sports drinks and are knowing they have to hydrate. So every fuel stop, they guzzle water. And by the end of the race, they've sweat out so much and then they drank so much water that their sodium levels have really dropped off. Or the other scenario is football two-a-days where you're losing a lot. And if somebody's just chugging a bunch of water, then they're not keeping up with that sodium loss. So those are extreme cases. But electrolyte replacement's important. And if you know you're a salty sweater, the way you can tell if you're a salty sweater is multiple, but one, if it stings your eyes really badly, then you know you're getting salt in your eyes. If a white crust forms on your clothing after it dries from your sweat, then that's salt. So you know you're losing a lot of salt. So you're going to have to add more back. So that could be through electrolyte packages. So for instance, Gatorade makes Gatorlyte packages that are just salt packages that you mix in and drink. They taste awful. But then you have other companies like Nuun, it's spelled Nuun, that's an electrolyte tablet, the right stuff. There's multiple products out there, but you don't even have to do that if you just add salt to your food. If you're a salty sweater, then those vegetables or meats that you're eating, if you add some salt, typically if you're looking at a quarter of a teaspoon of salt added to your food, that's more than enough. Then people typically would need to replace what they sweat out. But from a hydration standpoint, water, milk, and the occasional sports drink around training is the way to go.
Let's stay on this because we had another question about this, which I thought was really good. We are in beautiful Klamath Falls, Oregon, which is at 4,100 feet of elevation. I have players that will be coming back to campus that are either in Southern California or up in Washington. We actually have a player from Hawaii. So, for example, when that comes, who is in a very humid, area, what things would help them, make that transition when they get here? Or just, things that you could maybe suggest, that would help them with especially hydration.
Sure. At higher elevations, you have higher water needs. It tends to be drier, so the water evaporates quicker. You lose a lot more through evaporation, so you do have higher needs. So one thing that across the board I recommend for all athletes is drinking on a schedule, and it may be that they have to. So let me step back. Generally, divide your body weight in pounds in half. That's the number of ounces of water fluids that you should be striving to get on an average day. And then the more you sweat, the more you need on top of that. So then what I would recommend is if you weighed 140 pounds, then that's 70 ounces in a day. Divide that by the number of hours that you're awake, and that tells you how many ounces that you should be trying to get every hour. And if we do that, then you're spacing out your fluid. You're going to be able to absorb more of it. If we chug 32 ounces at once, you'll absorb some of it, but you're going to lose a lot more through your urine and not get as much. So that's where you could drink the right amount for the day and still not be adequately hydrated because we lost it. So first, drinking on a schedule. And if they are used to doing that in California or in Hawaii, then they need to know that when they get to the higher elevation that we're going to bump that hourly rate up by 1 or 2 ounces every hour. And you're going to make up for the amount that you're losing to evaporation. The other piece is salt and carbohydrates help you hang on to that water too. So it helps you keep you from losing as much so quickly.
Awesome. Last one here. Player mentioned running out of energy, either in or at the end of practice, and just any suggestions, that they could make, either maybe before, obviously my brain went to, bringing some sort of bar to practice, but
Yep.
anything that you recommend?
Sure. There's multiple variables that could be causing that. So we'd have to find what the root cause would be first to address it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, immediately, if you think running out of energy, it's probably just not enough fuel to get through the whole practice. So that bar to have right as you're leading into practice, possibly having something very easy to eat during. So if there is a break, so that's why this is the one time where sugar could be good. So that's why you have so many companies like Gatorade and Cliff Bar and Power Bar that make products to have during events. So if you think about what marathon runners consume while they're running, it's to get that into the bloodstream. So those little gummy blocks or gels are something that you can easily consume during a break and give you what you need. Now, that being said, it still takes 30 minutes for that to get into your stomach and something simple like that and into the bloodstream. So you can't wait till you're out of energy to try to address it. There needs to be a strategy to prevent that from happening. So you want to have that at a strategically timed point. And so if you notice you're always running out of energy in the last 10 minutes of practice, back that up by 30 minutes and then get something during that time frame. So that's one simple strategy. I mean, it could be what we've already talked about today too, of sleep, could be hydration, because all of that impacts energy levels too.
Randy, this has been awesome. I made a couple of notes as you were talking, so I'd like to do a quick speed round here, maybe where, you don't spend more than, because I'm going to throw some stuff at you that you just spurred my brain or that you brought up. So I let me just fire through a couple of these and you can just quickly go. So fad diets, my girls are on social media, they see, oh, you should eat vegan. You already addressed, hey, there's some good things, but boy, you've got to have more, of this. Keto, hey, you should fast, for 12 hours because, this organic versus non-organic versus grass-fed versus, I mean, where does your head go with some of these things? Can you just quickly, elaborate on maybe a little bit of that?
Sure. So quickly, possibly great for general public, not so great for athletes when we think fads. So keto, there's a lot of emerging research that could be beneficial for the sedentary person. For an athlete that needs to be explosive, it doesn't provide the fuel type for an explosive athlete. It's more for your low intensity or lack of intensity and long distance type stuff. Definitely not explosive athletes. intermittent fasting. It's potentially great for somebody trying to lose weight. Again, general public, because then that compresses their opportunity to eat, because it goes back to that, calories in, calories out. If you're trying to lose weight, that equation matters, but it doesn't control what the calories are. And then when we talked about recovery and spacing protein out, if you compress that window, you don't have the chance to get the multiple times to fix your muscles. So not great for athletes. Organic versus non-organic depends on the food. So some organic foods really have no difference pesticide-wise than non-organic foods. And what I mean by that, like getting an organic banana that you're peeling and eating the inside, no difference than a regular banana. There is potential for pesticides on other produce, so that's where some people prefer organic. But there is a misnomer around organic in that organic still uses pesticides. They're just pesticides that are legally classified as organic pesticides. Because without pesticides, the farmers, organic or non-organic, are going to lose a lot of crop to pests. So it's just what pesticides are being used. So a lot of people just assume organic means no pesticides at all, and that's not true. It's just which ones are they using. Which other one did you go?
Grass-fed versus not for meat.
Okay, so for the meat, the difference in grass-fed versus not is really the type of fat that so for beef, the type of fat that cow has. The grass-fed beef has more omega-3 fats in it than your conventionally grown corn-fed. The other big difference is grass-fed and grass-finished. All cows are grass-fed to begin with. It's how they finish their maturity before the butcher gets them. The corn-fed, there's a lot more pesticides used for that corn. So then when the cow eats that food, then they're getting more of those chemicals that have been shown to have similar effect to those plastics that we talked about earlier. So that's one example where grass-fed could be healthier than your conventionally grown corn finished beef, just from the pesticide use around corn that the cows are eating, and the legality of what they use for animal feed is different than human feed.
And same thing on fish, right? Fresh caught versus farm raised. I mean, you have
for the most part, yeah. There are some more sustainable practices with some farm raised, but almost across the board, fresh wild caught is going to be more nutritious than your farm raised. I look more at that sustainability practices and where the fish is coming from, because there are regions of this world that I don't want to buy fish from. The way they feed fish in Vietnam and even China, not what you want to be getting. So more of the Asian sourced fish we should try to stay away from and get more of your wild caught in our area of the world.
Good. Lightning round still. I'm going to fire a couple words at you and just let me know what you think here. So, because I know that in my experience, athletes eat fast food, they drink alcohol, and they have an exorbitant amount of energy drinks, Rockstar and things. Where's your head go with knowing that those things happen, especially in our society, that's reality? What advice or what would you tell them about that stuff, and how does it impact their performance?
My mind goes all over the map on on some of those. So first, from an energy drink standpoint, what it immediately goes to mind, because I just did a presentation on dangers of stimulants, is the rising and progressively increasing number of emergency room visits by young individuals, high school, college age individuals, due to adverse events because of energy drinks. It negatively impacts the cardiovascular system, blood pressure, cardiac arrhythmias, so very dangerous. And the problem is that age population thinks that it could never happen to me. But energy drinks are not regulated like foods. They really are fitting into the supplement category. So what's in there may not be what's on the label. So got issues there. Alcohol impacts hormones, impacts sleep. Alcohol can help you fall asleep faster, but it disrupts the quality of sleep, can prevent you from getting into your REM cycle of sleep, which then affects growth hormone, affects overall recovery and your readiness to compete, changes metabolism, and makes it easy to store fat. It is a downer, so that's where the cycle can come in of you're drinking alcohol at night. Now you feel like you need the energy drinks, and then you're getting into that repetitive, endless cycle that is ultimately hurting you and your performance. And fast food just comes down to quality. So there are times that I have recommended fast food for somebody if that's the only thing that they can get. Sometimes fast food is definitely better than no food. But it is ultimately quality of, you got very cheap ingredients. If you're buying something for $1 off the dollar menu, they're still making money off of you.
Yeah.
So that tells you what you're actually getting.
Yeah. Yeah. We really don't want to know. You already brought up Asia. You mentioned this earlier, and I think it's something that I've experimented with that found to be very helpful. You mentioned meal prepping. Is this something that you would recommend, to your athletes? And you kind of alluded a little bit to, maybe making 3 or 4 portions, for the week. Is that something that you recommend?
Absolutely. One of the biggest barriers to eating as healthy as we can is time, and we tend to gravitate towards laziness. So if it's not convenient, we're less likely to do it. So if you spend time cooking one meal, it's not going to take you any longer to make that 3 or 4 meals. So then you can package that up and put some in the freezer. You can put some in the fridge. If you're like me, I could eat the same thing for a few days and not get tired of it. But I know some don't like doing that. So then you're putting it in a freezer bag and throwing it in the freezer for maybe next week or the week after. But if it's there and convenient and all you have to do is reheat it, that you're more likely to eat healthy and meet your needs that way than just flying by the seat of your pants and like, oh, what am I going to eat now? And then, no, I don't feel like spending 30 minutes cooking. Let me open up that package of ramen.
Yeah, and on this cooking piece, and I should have thrown this in with the fads, steaming or boiling, vegetables,
Sure.
losing all the nutrients when you do that, or obviously some of them. Is that an accurate, fad or thing that's out there?
Yeah, it depends on the vegetable as to what you're losing. But for instance, one of the bigger nutrients that we can eat that honestly, this might throw a wrench into some people's on your team's beliefs, but nitrates. Nitrates people automatically associate as being bad. They think sodium nitrate, it's terrible for you. You should stay away from it. actually is actually pretty good for you. Nitrates can increase nitric oxide in your body, and that's the quickest way to increase nitric oxide, and that improves blood flow. That's been shown to decrease the amount of oxygen you need to consume or have during an activity to do the same amount of work. So from an athletic standpoint, nitric oxide is great, but nitrates are found in our vegetables. So if nitrates were bad, then we would have all these negative side effects from eating vegetables, because we get a lot more nitrates from eating spinach than you do from a hot dog. The difference in that is if you're having a lot of nitrates and then adding a bunch of fat to it, then you could have some reaction. But that being said, when you steam spinach or other vegetables, you don't lose as much nitrates. If you boil it, those nitrates leak out into the waters. So you can cut the nitrate concentration of vegetables by really cut it in half if you're boiling it. So that's where microwaving and steaming are better. And then it just, again, depends on the nutrient itself that you're looking at. So potassium will leak into water. Potassium's great for your body, great for blood pressure. And if you're boiling something, you lose a lot more potassium than if you steam it or microwave it. So it depends on the nutrient. But yes, steaming is generally better than boiling. Microwaving, you tend to lose the least amount of nutrients in a vegetable if you microwave it versus the other two methods.
And then we've got to talk about what a microwave does to the food. So we won't even go there.
Well, the simple thing is it causes vibration inside it, and it's heating it up on the inside. So it's not the radiation that people think of as an X-ray. And for the minimal time that it's in there, I would say microwave is safe.
All right. I've got three quick ones here. And I've had an athlete say this to me, like, hey, I can eat like crap because I burn it all the time. I'm always going and blah, blah. That is again, may work, may, feel, but in the long term, they're not being committed, in my opinion, to being the best they can be if that's their attitude, correct?
Yeah. What I always say is typically you have what you were successful eating in high school because of just age and the body's growth only gets you so far. And generally you may be able to get through your freshman year eating like that and be fine, but then it catches up to you. And what I mean by catches up to you, with the intensity change in college versus high school, you've done more damage and you need to be repairing from that. And if you're not putting quality in, if you're putting, like you said, crap in, it will eventually catch up to you, and then you're going to be more injury prone and not be as recovered and ready to go compared to your next athlete who's actually paying attention to what they're putting in their body.
Yeah, awesome. You threw out a formula earlier, or an equation that I thought was really good for hydration.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any other things like that athletes, can do the math or try to help themselves? Obviously, I think it's really hard for athletes to know. You brought up how many calories they burn, for example, in a day. But is there any other formulas or things that your brain goes to that might help them, or math they can do to try to help, just find out what they're doing or where they're at or what they should be having?
Sure. The only real simple one is around protein. And when we look at grams of protein, generally you're looking at the most protein that your body's going to want is about a gram of protein per pound of your body weight for the day. So now that we take that and then you split it up by the number of meals and snacks, and then that tells you your target of protein per meal and snack. and that's at the high end. So you can eat a little less than that. But outside of the hydration one and the protein one, there's no simple equation to quickly do for athletes.
Okay. Any videos or books or things that you would recommend an athlete, hey, they should all watch this on YouTube, or they should all, have this book or read this because this would be really helpful?
Most of the stuff on you'll find a lot more bad stuff on YouTube and Netflix than good stuff. It's it's the good stuff's not as interesting. And what I mean by that is your documentaries like Game Changers and things like Fed Up are sensationalized and catches your attention, and it's just a lot of cherry-picked data and bad science. So it's really hard to find that on a platform like YouTube and Netflix. But there's some good scientists, good researchers that still do stuff around it. But when it comes to just a general sweeping claim, no, there's not much that I would say, okay, everybody has to read this or watch this.
Last thing I got for you. You've been in this industry, for obviously in the collegiate setting here professionally, 15 years, and obviously you did some stuff at Virginia Tech, I know, prior to kind of getting in full time. So what are your biggest takeaways? And obviously, technology and industry and research and things change all the time, but what would your 1 minute deal be to an athlete, just in closing?
Sure. Essentially, it's change doesn't happen overnight. We all have areas to improve, and it is to use a sports analogy, it's a marathon and not a sprint. The way we fuel our body is ultimately going to impact how you feel, how you perform, your daily life in general. So whatever changes you're trying to make, you want to make sure you're changing for that reason, not changing just to look different. You want to impact how you feel and your health. And it needs to be sustainable, meaning something that you can do and enjoy to do all the time, and not just, okay, I have a lifetime plan, not just a summer plan, meaning I don't have a goal just for that beach body. This is how I want to eat all the time. There's no end. It's the way you should always be.
Yeah, and Randy, to that point, this spring, I tried to help them create a routine with fitness, and skill development. And it was really powerful to me to hear you say that, like, hey, you've got to create this routine. And, I think it'll be something, I emphasize, obviously, moving into the summer. And I may just, reach out to you again here shortly just to try to pick your brain on ways to try to help them. But I'm a big believer in, people want to change and they want to, again, maximize their potential. And, to me, this is a big piece of it. I was very excited that, on more than one occasion, I was meeting with my team on Wednesdays, and kids had asked about nutrition and help with nutrition and ideas. And, it's why I appreciate taking 90 minutes and doing this with me, and you helping a lot of people with this. So thanks a ton.
No problem.
Always great to catch up. Good to see you. I hope the family's doing well. And hopefully you didn't sweat through your shirt there in Virginia, because if I remember correctly, there's a thing called humidity out there.
Today is much better than yesterday.
Hey, have a great week, Randy. Thank you.
Hey, you too. No problem. See you again.
All right. Bye-bye.